this Tikkun Leil Shavuot custom, as you might imagine, came to be with the development of coffee and the discovery of coffee. So I hope everybody's, who, can get that support of coffee right now if you need and is having a nice cup. I also want to really just appreciate everybody who is staying up here. One of the reasons why this is called a tikkun this evening, tikkun means repair. And the question is repairing what? What is our studying Torah together repairing? One midrash is that most of the Israelites at Mount Sinai were asleep. They fell asleep. They didn't get the full revelation. They didn't get the full experience. And so the tikkun that we do is we stay up so that, so that we will get the full experience that will repair when we were asleep. So Rabbi Berman.
Shakuroth, Rabbi Kavod. I see at the bottom of the screen, we still have 57 people on. This is the biggest crowd I've worked to all year. I want to thank everybody for staying around. I want to thank all the people who are responsible for putting this thing together. I want to thank the idiots who gave me this time spot. And I want to thank everybody who's been put all the effort and all the energy and everything else that's been put into this. I have something probably a little less spiritual to deal with tonight. When Rabbi Kavod called me and said, "You want to participate?" I said, "Sure." After all, we used to do tikkunim when I was living in Israel. They'd go all night, and in the morning, at the crack of dawn, we'd all end our study and walk down to the kotel and just sort of make the regulars down there angry because we wanted to do an egalitarian minyan. Those were the good old days. You could still do that. You can't do that so much anymore. So, frankly, Josh, if you want to be on, I'm inviting anybody to raise their hand at any time. But Josh, I'm going to rely on you to just give me a second. There's a hand up and there's a question. That's all I need. What I'm talking about tonight is based on our current circumstances. Everybody's been talking about the COVID-19. Well, what have we done in the past? I can't tell you how many times on Facebook I look at somebody saying, he who forgets the past is doomed to repeat it. And this is the right-wingers, the left-wingers, everybody's saying this, and nobody seems to know what the history is. So let's take a look at some of the ways that we've dealt with this before. And, from biblical times on up to, more recent times. I'm going to talk about some stuff that's in the Bible. I'm going to talk about some stuff that's in non-biblical history. And anybody has a question along the way, feel free to just hop on in and we'll deal with it no matter what. So, does anybody know the first plague in the Bible? 2, 3, 4. That's all the time you get. I would say, I'm not sure if it was actually the first one, but the first one I'm thinking of are the plagues that preceded our leaving Egypt. And how did we deal with that? Well, we left Egypt. But what was the medicine? What was the prescription for that last plague so we wouldn't catch it and we wouldn't get killed? Anybody? I can see heads nodding. Let's see here. I'm going to change my orientation so I can see more faces. Wait, I saw a hand. It's Barbara and Wendy.
Yes. Yeah, they smeared the doorposts of their house with the blood of the lamb.
That's right. It's not so popular these days.
Not so popular these days at all.
But
blood was considered to be life-giving, so that's
right. And you could have too much of it. In the Middle Ages, they would take some out because you got clogged up with blood. They let a little out. Had a different outlook on it. But right, that's the way they did it. Did anybody mention another plague that's in the Torah even? Very good, Barbara. Okay.
Rabbi, I see Jerry, did you want to add something there?
Jerry.
Well, one that comes to mind is, pardon me, is Miriam came down with this, with the old leprosy, and
Right.
I don't know if it was something between Egypt and that, but that seemed fairly close on.
That was in the desert. But a plague usually hits more than one person, and I buy it. I'm not sure I would include it in a list of plagues, but I'm thinking that after the incident, let's see, there's the incident with Balak, with Bilam, Bilam the prophet tries to curse the Israelites, and he can't seem to do it. And what comes out of that is the Matovu, the story that a lot of us are familiar with. But after he failed to curse the Jewish people, the Israelites, apparently there was something else that he did manage to succeed in, and that is he sent a slew of Midianite women to seduce the Israelite men. Now, I don't know exactly what it was, but Israelite men seem to have been just a soft touch for Midianite women. And they managed to seduce a lot of men. And it doesn't mention that there was a plague until the very end when the plague stops. And it stopped. Anyone remember how the plague was stopped? It's one of the more dramatic Evan Rule.
Yeah, Pinchas killed the guy.
Pinchas, right. Yeah, every year you get to read this. Here comes Pinchas again with that darn spear. You want to tell us the story, Evan?
No, I'll let you do that. That's okay.
Oh, okay, coward. Apparently one of the princes of Israel and one of the princesses of Midian kind of got together. He's taking her into his tent, and they were arranged in such a position that Pinchas could spear the two of them with one spear. I don't want to get too graphic. But that was the prescription for that, and he's given the covenant of peace, breach shalom, and the rabbi said, don't do this, nobody try this at home. So that's basically what happened there. Then there's this another place, not in the Torah, with King David. I think it's in 2 Samuel 24. Anybody know this story? It's a pretty good one. David is that Josh? No.
No.
Okay. David is going to have a census to count up how many soldiers he's got because he needs to know how to make a military move. Now, this starts a plague. Apparently, the theology behind this is that if you're going to take a census to know how many people you've got, you're not putting your faith enough in God, who doesn't care about numbers. So look at the story of Gideon, who took 300 people, 300 men, and they beat an army of thousands of Philistines. So, faith and resolve seem to trump over numbers in that particular case. And as a result of that, we saw that taking a census that's not God mandated was a no-no. You shouldn't do that. And that's one of the reasons you see all these different methods of counting a minion that isn't 1, 2, 3. You get not 1, not 2, not 3, until you get up to 10. Or you take a 10-word sentence or pasuk, a verse, and you do a one-to-one correspondence with that. It's like to be or not to be. That is the question. That's a 10-word sentence. And if you got one person there for every word, you got a minion. Or Hoshea et amecha vorech nachatecha urim v'naseh ma'ad olam, same thing. So, does anyone remember how David stops the plague? I see people thinking. That's good. Get the wheels turning this time of day. But, okay, if there are no hands, I'll just go ahead. The first thing David does is he offers himself. He says, stop the plague on my people, take me and my family. Now, he didn't actually consult his family about this, but that's a matter of time and place. But God says, no, you don't have to do that. Just make a sacrifice to me. And he does, and the plague stops. So there were biblical plagues. And in the Bible, it's pretty much seen that plagues happen for a reason. And there's basically two ways of looking at this kind of thing. One says that God is punishing us. And we have if you go to a service that has a Musaf on Saturday, every Musaf, whether it's a holiday or Shabbat or whatever, has a line in there that says, because of our sins, we were exiled from our land. You know, we've always taken the approach, it's our fault. What did we do? And, honey, could I bother you for a glass of water? So that's one approach. And I think that's held us in good stead. Other societies looked at their woes and their troubles and their plagues and their pestilences and everything else, and they said, who can we blame for this? And we've been around the longest. So, you know, we did, one of the things we did was sort of look into ourselves, and that generated, well, one way of expressing that is it generated enough self-reflection that for growth and awareness, and that helped us sustain, and we became a long-lasting people. That's okay, just pour the water on my notes. The other way of looking at it is a little bit more biblical, more rabbinic. As I tell my congregation all the time, Judaism is not so much a biblical religion. I mean, things start in the Bible, but they don't end there. The Bible will have a line like, thou shalt not see the calf in its mother's milk, and we make all the laws of kashrut out of that. So the rabbis had a different take on natural disasters, including plagues and epidemics. And that is, the world goes along nature's rule, that the world proceeds on its own terms. As one rabbi said, there was a disaster and someone said, how could this act of God happen? And the rabbi says, that wasn't an act of God. That was an act of nature. The act of God comes in when people start helping each other out of the act of nature and afterwards. So that's our job. My colleague and emeritus, Rabbi Mordechai Kiefer, would tell a story about an interfaith event where he was a little bit late, and he gets to the church where the event was, and he says, when does the service start? And the parishioner at the church says, the second we leave here. Service is more important than prayer. And it's a good thing if you pray, because it might lead to action. And it's another thing in the Talmud. So, another thing that happened in the Bible, it was after the Korach incident. The Korach incident, the ground opens up, swallows everybody, and then there's a plague. And the plague, this time, is cured by Moses telling Aaron to walk around the people with a frying pan full of incense, an incense pan. The incense, the ingredients are listed. There's if you've ever been to a traditional morning service, there's a thing called Petuma Katoret, and which is a list of all the ingredients in the incense. And the incense was very powerful. They say that that if the incense was lit in Jerusalem, you could smell it in Jericho. It's pretty good stuff. It's better than what you can get at the head shop. Anyway, so he walked around with the incense, and it cured the plague. Thousands of people died, but he was able to stop it. Incidentally, the Pinchas plague was also had thousands, deaths in the thousands. It was like a 24,000 person loss, net loss. Nothing to sneeze at. Okay. Okay. Now, let's move ahead in history a little bit. There was this thing in the 14th century called the Black Plague. The Black Plague, or the Bubonic Plague, wiped out somewhere between 30 and 60% of all the people in the world, basically. It starts in Asia, an invading army brings it to Europe. Somewhere around Ukraine, there's a battle. During the battle, people who died from the plague are put on catapults and being thrown into the other side. It was the first example of biological warfare. People are dying like crazy. And because of a number of things that was perceived, although not really documented, that the Jews were suffering less from the plague. Well, let's not waste an opportunity to blame the Jews. We could always be the scapegoat, no matter what, because we were a big enough people to be noticed and too small to do anything really to defend ourselves completely. We were the perfect population size to be a scapegoat. And the plague was no different. So there are some various theories as to why, if it was true, the Jews got it less. The ritual washing of the hands before eating bread, the going to the mikveh, bathing at all was not really a European idea at the time. So basic hygienic practices helped people not get or spread the plague. Another thing that that I noticed in my reading was the Jews emptied out their grain storages every year for Passover because you had to, well, you couldn't keep the chametz around, right? So because they emptied out the grain storage, they had fewer rats, and the rats are what spread the plague. Now, no good deed goes unpunished. That people said the Jews aren't getting the plague as much, and let's just blame them for it. What the heck? And eventually, they've already been practiced on. The Crusades were great practice sessions for killing Jews. We're going to Jerusalem to destroy the infidel. Really? Well, I think there's some infidels over that hill there, those Jews. Let's go practice on them. That's what happened. So, let's see. They also dealt with it by quarantining, being set aside. And this goes back to Gerald's comment about Miriam. She is set aside, and the interesting thing about that story is that the people wouldn't leave without her. So they waited for her to get cured, and then they continued on their march. But other people took quarantine pretty seriously. They hold up. Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azurai was traveling to raise money for the Holy Land. He was quarantined for 40 days. That's where you get the word quarantine from the French for 40. In the port city of Livorno in Italy. And while in quarantine, he compiled one of his most famous works, the Shem HaGedolim, the names of the great ones. And it was really the quintessential first Jewish bibliography. It was raised. I talked to my congregation earlier tonight and made some of the same presentation. Someone brought up the idea, the fact that Isaac Newton, arguably not Jewish, but nonetheless, Isaac Newton was at his family estate in the country to get away from outbreak of the plague. And that's where he came up with his laws of physics, because he had nothing to do but sit around and think. So don't forget, you can interrupt me at any time. Let's see here. Another thing they did was limit crowds. Is this sounding familiar yet? During an outbreak of cholera in 1831, people turned to one of the leading rabbis of the generation, Akiva Agar, and he said, don't get in big groups. Matter of fact, he instituted something that was done at, in Jerusalem, one of the places I used to daven was a place called the Shtibla, which had rotating minions all the time in different rooms of a big old house. And so you would never have a huge minion at any time, but you would have a quality minion. But they weren't trying to get rid of a plague, but they were more focused on the fact that people daven when they got there. So he was ahead of the time. We're still doing that. And another thing that people did was to help each other. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Let's see here. Here we go. There were other responses to pandemics, plagues, bad luck, you name it. One of the more interesting things was something that was called the Schwarze Chasana, the Black Wedding. What was the Black Wedding? Good question. The Black Wedding was a ceremony that took place when times were bad, showing God that we helped each other, and hoping that God would see this and take mercy on us and not kill us off. And basically, it starts in 1785, the earliest recorded Black Wedding, and it's, the records record Rabbi Elimelech of Vizhensk was the Mesader Kedushin, and it happened during an outbreak of cholera. It's sort of the Jewish version of love in the time of cholera. Black weddings took place 1865 in Sfat and Yerushalayim, following a massive plague of locusts that had destroyed the crops and resulted in the death of many hundreds of people. And they had a wedding. And the idea was you took a poor person or an orphan or two orphans and you married them together. And an eyewitness account said that the leaders of that holy city took boys and girls who were orphans and married them off to each other. And the chuppot were in a cemetery between the graves of the teachers, the Arizal, and the Rabbi Isaac Luria, and Joseph Caro, the Beit Yosef, and the author of the Shulchan Aruch, saying that we're doing this wedding between the gravestones of two of the greatest scholars who ever lived in a cemetery to show you that we're really serious about this. There was in Winnipeg, Canada, November the 11th, 1918. I guess was the first armistice day. Hebrews hold wedding of death to halt flu. A local newspaper reported that the elaborate wedding had been planned for more than a month. At the one end of the cemetery, a quorum of 10 Jews conducted a funeral. The other, 1,000 Gentiles and Jews witnessed the wedding, and they give the name of the bride, the groom, and the rabbi. It was a simple ceremony, a man and a woman, each unmarried and either impoverished, orphaned, or disabled, and sometimes all three, were married together as husband and wife under a chuppah, and the couple's new home was established with donations by the community. With this active group chesed, it was hoped that the plague would be averted. And the great flu pandemic of 1918, 1919 that claimed 50 to 100 million lives worldwide. In the US, over 670,000 people died. And they didn't know from germs, they didn't know from bacteria, they didn't know from viruses, but they did this. And I want to get back to the germs and viruses for a second, and just before I have to get out of here. But people donated to the trousseau of the married couple, and they've from 10 cents to $100, they've managed to put together $1,000 for one couple. And $1,000 in 1918 was serious money. So they were doing good things. But also, I want to say that the attention to hygiene really was something that the Jews did practice, and more over the years. So we've always had a approach to this kind of event. We pray, we analyze, we try and figure out what's going on, we try and stop it. The prayer leads to action, and the action leads to saving lives. That's basically how we roll. And I think I'm going to call it there. Any other questions? We have, I think, 2 minutes. Any hands? Any feet? No handshakes, please. Don't touch your face.
I think people are needing another cup of coffee there, Rabbi.
Yes, that's my fault.
Never your fault.
Okay, well, I'm glad we, those of you who invested in coffee, I'm glad that it paid off.
Yasher Koach, Rabbi Berman, thank you so much for putting